It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. My name is Lewis. I'm the host of the show. Hi, hello, g'day. I've left the window open behind me for some atmospheric sounds of inner city Auckland, where it appears a troop, a collective of vagrants. Is that a term to cause offence? It's not meant to. Let's see, vagrant. A person without a settled home or regular work who wanders from place to place and lives by begging. Well, the last bit I'm not sure of, so that's a little unfair. Actually, I'm not sure of all of it, so it's all quite an unfair statement. But there is a crunk soundtrack behind me outside the window, and a collective of hobos... Oh, terrible. A collective of hobos have rested their bindles and their weary souls to that soundtrack. It's lovely stuff. Funnily enough, in this episode, what comes up as one of the topics is, in fact, reconciling one's social values, social outlook, with then also being a homeowner. I chatted about that with my guest today, Yadana Saw from Wellington. I was going to say, I'm sort of funny about, giving people identities through their work. I was going to say from RNZ, from Radio New Zealand, where she's, I'm describing her as a music journalist, a radio presenter, and a audio storyteller. For my money, she's one of the best people on the radio in New Zealand at the moment. So that's lovely. I do try and pay her a couple of such compliments on the show, but there's some great... In the great New Zealand tradition, deflection of praise. But no, it's a lovely chat. We chatted about what did we chat about? We chatted about Newtown. That's exciting. We chatted about interview and conversation techniques. I chatted about that weird moment which Yadana referred to as Zoom purgatory, when I waited for her in the Zoom room alone. And then it does some amazing digital hair and makeup happens. I'll tell you, when you suddenly end up in the room, I looked far more presentable when a second person entered. We talk podcast gripes, we talk student radio. She made an excellent student radio documentary on RNZ a few years back, which is how it's led to her, as in her words, never giving her swipe card back after that project at RNZ. We talk about the trajectory of a few of the student stations. We talk about university, the trajectory of life in general. She talks about writing a book that's called The Next, an impression of hip-hop expression, with Sarah Tamati and Danica Waiti. We talked about the soundtrack of taxis and how an inquiring passenger, such as myself and herself, as she made it into a radio feature, can bear fruits of musical knowledge. That's how I found about Bally Sagoo, big Indian super DJ. Don't you know, in Melbourne, when I asked, God, that's a while ago, probably 15 years ago. Time flies. Check out a bunch of Yadana's work via the wireless, the FM tuner on RNZ, or probably even easier in terms of archival material, the RNZ website, which is really well resourced with great stuff these days from all their creators and people of input. We also talked about her heritage right towards the end, which was very compelling. I sort of had it on the notes to come up earlier in the episode, but the way conversations go, sometimes you have to leave stuff, but we kind of did a bit of a dip into that towards the end, and I found out the difference or the reasoning between choosing to call Burma Burma or call Burma Myanmar. I will now call it Burma. My way to learning about cultures is often through my stomach. And so I've been flicking through my Complete Asian Cookbook, which is quite a work. It came out in the 1970s, an Australian I'm not sure what she is. Chef, author, Charmaine Solomon. And now I'm deep in the Burmese section, but I do need to know, listeners, if anyone can tip me off to a good Burmese restaurant in New Zealand, even better Auckland, that would be fantastico. Rate and comment on the show on Apple Podcasts. Follow and subscribe on whatever podcast portal you employ, and like the show on Facebook at Verbal Highs Podcast, Twitter at Verbal Highs. Also have a website, verbalhighs.com, where you'll also find something I'm tapping away at when I get the time, a New Zealand podcast directory, a list of over 350 plus New Zealand podcast series with clickable links to audio for each entry.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Did you want this on just audio? Please say yes.
If you don't want to be face to face, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh no, that's hang on a sec. Let me just start my video then.
I've been hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Oh, you at work?
I am at work.
Excellent. It's weird being in a. Have you been in a Zoom room on your own for a length of time?
Yes.
It's weird sitting there like looking at yourself.
It's like purgatory.
I was just thinking, you are probably about to experience something I have a distinct memory of realizing I was experiencing for one of the first times with you when I went to RNZ and suddenly realized I was the one in the interviewee seat.
Yeah.
And I suddenly had so much more respect for all the people I'd talked to over all the years, because it's actually like, I think it's a bigger job in some ways, right?
Yeah, it made me realize how important asking a question is in terms of the answer you want. Like when you're on the other side, it's like, oh, what do you actually mean? But at the same time, it's like, because you know what people want, you can say, what do you actually want me to say? Blah, blah, blah. So,
do you think there's more? I think there's maybe more. You have more pressure on yourself if you've been in the question asking seat for years, because you're so aware of the kind of mechanics of it all.
Yeah. But then sometimes it means that you can just say, okay, what is it you actually want? How do you want me to say it? I can do that. That kind of thing. I've noticed that with some people.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you prep for interviews? Like, you may notice that I lead with an anecdote. Like, do you have like a plan for how to warm to people? Because I'm thinking like, you would have done way more of these than I have. Like, I've had those moments where you get like 15 minutes with someone who's done 10 hours. Are awful. Yeah. So do you have some kind of way of kind of trying to charm them in when that's what everyone else is probably trying to do as well?
I'll let you in on one trick, which is to ask what are they sick of talking about? What's everyone asked them about? That's always a good one.
Do they ever say, I get asked that all the time as well?
No, because most people don't ask how they are.
Right. Well, as you may have noticed, we're straight into it with this one. Have you listened to any of these? It's okay if you haven't. There's so much content.
I think I've listened to a couple of them, yeah.
Great. We're up to about, I think you'll be 98, so I'm not prolific. It's one of those things where, like, when I started it, someone said, or I read somewhere, like, back when blogs were a much bigger thing, like, the mark of success for a blog is if it kind of is still going after a year, like in terms of if you're still doing stuff for it. So I did 50 in the first year. I look back and don't actually know how I did that on top of everything else. And
that's quite impressive.
Right. But it's sort of dropped down since, so I'm trying to get about 25 this year and sort of one every 2-3 weeks, I guess. So welcome.
Thank you.
We start kind of with a bit of a kind of an origin story. So were you born in Wellington?
I was. Yeah. I was. Yep. First in my family.
I like kind of carbon dating people because I think it's good for listeners. That's a sort of a roundabout way of saying how old are you? When were you born? What year?
I was born in 1978 and with many other people of the time, born at St Helens Hospital, maternity hospital, which I can see from my backyard. So I haven't gone very far.
Where's that?
In Newtown, in Wellington.
Oh, you mean just being born in Wellington Hospital pretty much?
Well, it used to be a separate maternity hospital away from the main hospital. So, it's this idea that maternity was different to, a medical condition, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
But now it's an apartment block that I can see from my garden.
And is that where you had your kids?
No, I had them, I walked down the road to have them at Wellington Regional Hospital.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was that there's a photo of me with the midwife in St. Helens Hospital, and it turns out she also looked after my kids.
So
And we
good.
figured that out at my second child. I was like, hang on a minute. Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
It's a very Wellington story.
A very Wellington story.
And so you went to school in
Newtown?
Newtown, yep.
Yeah.
Newtown
so
school.
I went to the school behind there, which was St. Anne's Primary, the little Catholic school, where, you know, you were a minority if you were Pākehā there. So it was lots of Pacific Island kids and immigrant kids. And yeah, I was in there amongst all of them.
That's the same as Newtown school though as well at the time, right?
Yes. And then my mum would make me do this terrible thing of, just cut through Newtown school. It's, you know, seconds faster to get to school. It's like, that's the walk of death. Thanks, Mum. In my
What do you
ugly
mean?
little school
What is that?
uniform.
Oh, in the uniform, right.
Yeah. You don't cross enemy lines. Jeez. But now my kids go to Newtown school, so.
How much has Newtown? Newtown's changed a lot, right?
Yes. Oh, I think
It's an interesting one. It's kind of retained.
yes, there's an enduring spirit in
Yeah.
Newtown, but, you know, we've seen our first Range Rover parked in the driveway of a freshly bought property, so that's a bit worrying.
Why?
Sorry, Range Rover owners.
Why?
Well, you know, that's the beginning of gentrification, and I
Yeah.
think then the expectations of what your local school provides, how much noise people can make in the neighbourhood, you know,
yeah.
whether you just, you know, Newtown's a very live and let live community. You can have as many loud parties as you like. No one bothers anyone, but, you know, that'll start to change as people have to spend nearly $2 million to buy their house. They're going to want their precious sleep in silence.
Yeah. I'm guessing that you probably don't find yourself in the middle of town late at night these days. But what's going on with all this press coverage about Wellington? Is it just press mania, or is it murder and chaos in the streets?
Well, compared to when you were lurking around the inner city streets of
20 plus years ago.
Wellington, there are a lot more transient.
Yeah.
There's a bigger transient community. You know, we used to know Bucket Man and Blanket Man and,
Yeah, right.
you know, Private Dancer. You know, we knew our characters by name, and now there's a lot more people on harder times living on the streets, and that's a huge change in my lifetime in Wellington. You know, like, let's not forget, Manners Mall used to have those communities of street kids, and they were glue sniffing in the 80s. So I'm not trying to make it like there weren't social problems before, but I just think that the help's not as accessible, and it's really, there's not really a pathway for people to get themselves out of that as easily. I don't know. Yeah. So there's that aspect.
It's a big topic. It's the same up here. And it's funny you're talking about gentrification, and I've been like trying to reconcile myself now as someone who owns property, and then
we're property owners
in my building, we've had similar problems where like my values are pushing up against what I want from owning a property, and we've got kind of similar problems you describe in inner city Wellington happening in our building, and it's sort of like everyone needs a place to live, but a lot of people are being found emergency housing but in our building, but not being given a whole lot of other support they need, and that makes living here quite it's been quite sort of stressful in the last few months, you know. It's such a big topic.
It is, and you know, people don't mean to end up in these situations.
No,
it's because they're vulnerable, or you know, it's just things have not fallen their way. Life is just harder for some people, and you know, I guess the only thing I would say about that is, as someone who has a stable job like yourself or owns a place, we're in an immensely privileged position to support people like that, you know, to be at least compassionate towards that.
This went quite
I'm
deep.
not going to take anything
quickly.
away from you. What's that?
This went quite deep, quite quickly.
Yeah.
Did you stay in? Did you do all your schooling in Wellington?
No. We moved to Whangarei when I was 8, which was quite a trip from living in Wellington.
Would you describe it as a culture shock? Whangarei is very different to Wellington in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. Being an Asian immigrant family moving up to the winterless north, where shoes were optional when you go to school and you couldn't buy half the ingredients you needed to make for mum to make the food we were accustomed to. You couldn't even buy a sack of rice in Whangarei. It's quite a culture shock, but...
so you were kind of New Zealand washed by you couldn't find kind of.
You had to drive down to Auckland comforts. To go stock up on the fish sauce and whatnot.
Did you feel like a kind of an other in that regard at school?
Oh, hell yeah! Ooh, yuck! What's in your lunchbox? Ooh, yuck! What's that?
Really?
Yeah.
Kids are ruthless, man.
Yeah, and my mum and I used to get followed around shops.
What?
People are like, you wouldn't have experienced racism. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, the 80s and 90s in New Zealand was a totally,
Who said you wouldn't have
place.
experienced racism?
A lot of people. Because,
Right.
I'm one of those day walkers. I totally pass as white with my, proper broadcasting, talking and whatnot.
Yeah, and also, like, in terms of, like, the kind of stereotype of the quote-unquote Asian, you're not, you don't look Chinese or Japanese or whatever. So there's that as well.
Oh, but, there are only 2 categories when you're at school. It's either you're a curry-munching Indian or a ching-chong Chinese. It's like there was no other spectrum of Asian. Yeah, so I get it on both hits.
Oh, my goodness. And did you, like with Whangarei, you enjoyed the experience outside of
Apparently,
that?
I always claimed that I was coming back to Wellington.
Yeah.
Because, I couldn't handle
When did you
it,
leave?
as I once said in a debating, in a debate. These peasants, mere ignorant peasants of the north. That's what I once... Well, it's debating. You're supposed to say stuff like that, right? You got to get into the rhetoric. But yeah, I always claimed to be coming back to the more... the city life. The city life. And now I'd do anything to go back up there and, kick around with jandals till the middle of winter.
How old were you when you left?
I left for uni.
No. When you left Wellington...
8. I was 8.
How did you develop such a strong identity as a Wellingtonian by 8? Or was it more kicking back against the move, like wanting to go back to what you knew?
Oh, a little bit of that. Because all my uncles and aunts and grandmother was still in Wellington, so my heart was always here, and I still had a couple of friends I kept in touch with, wrote letters and, would sort of, even as teenagers, arrange to meet to go to our first concerts and stuff like that. It's a funny thing. I changed schools for my final year in like 7th form, year 13. And even then the teachers had gone, you didn't hear that.
What was that?
Oh no, just Zen. I sit next to Zen. You have to do some editing. Anyway, the school I hadn't even been there for a year managed to clock who I was and go, oh, this is Yadana. She's off to go do her degree in politics.
Yeah.
And is off to join the Cafe Society. So they got my number by the time I was 17.
What did you study when you came back down?
Politics and anthropology.
Yep.
And I did that through to postgrad.
And did you have any broadcasting aspirations back then? Because the Active wouldn't have been on campus then, right? It would have just left.
I think it would have just left. Oh, but Radioactive was an impenetrable haven of all the cool kids and boys. So I rolled around with the Students Association lot and with Salient. So I think my first job for Salient was as the sports reporter.
With an interest in sports or?
Yeah, of course.
Playing sports?
Yeah.
What are your sports?
Football all the way.
Right.
But I've played rugby, cricket, netball, volleyball, badminton. Yeah. Have given it... Worst sport I ever tried was lacrosse. Blech. Do not recommend.
I used to give American Pie.
It's a strange sport. It's not fun to get hit in the head with one of those balls. I think those are all the sports I did.
So funny you saying that about active. Like I've heard that before. It's funny, like because I was involved.
You're
in
in
active,
the team.
obviously.
You wouldn't understand.
Yeah, no, but I think it's always like it's two things. I think it's kind of youth because you overcame that and ended up involved with active later. But also, it's funny how people view things from the outside because it was basically just a bunch of kind of like misfits and weirdos and slightly nerdy people rather than kind of cool people. I think.
No, but it's that thing of you do become a clique, or people do become a bit patch protective or whatever. I mean, my first after school job was, other than packing tomatoes, was working in a music store, and even then I still did not. Radioactive just seemed absolutely impenetrable. And there was a lot of drum and bass at that time. It just seemed like endless drum and bass and dub music. That was the time
I think you just described
when Wellington fell into that dub coma.
Yeah, that's what I've heard you say before. It was funny, I heard you say that because I listened to a bit of your chat with Simon, and then you sort of did an about turn and described basically a love of a whole lot of music really similar anyway. But
yeah.
But I do hear you that for a while there, like when I'd come back, I think kind of early 2000s, it did seem like when you turned it on, it was a very similar soundtrack to life.
Whereas it sounds amazing now. I mean, I have to sort of caveat that with being involved with the board of Radioactive, but I'm just so excited about it. There's new presenters on there, and there's such an interesting way of compiling music. If anything, I think the thing that's endured is people's passion and love of music, but it definitely doesn't have that wankery.
Yeah, and also, look, I think...
and it's interesting because you will hear pop music put next to some classic music, and I would say it's more of a algorithmic way of liking music, where that then say, these are the artists I must play because I'm wedded to only playing cool stuff.
I think there's another thing that's gone on recently that's really crucial, and I mean, you, if anyone knows about the history of student radio, which we'll talk about later because you made that amazing doco, but not unique to active. What happened, I don't know when it started happening, a lot of people just started sticking around very long term. I'm talking kind of announcers, and some of those people, still have their slots and they deserve them, but there's been a big shake of the rug a lot of places, and it's happened active recently, and I think it's really healthy. And even just like having a young woman do the breakfast show for a start, and
we've got a young woman as the program director, and
right?
as well. And I think there's definitely Radioactive, or maybe sort of that student radio network, are those places where the umbrella or the one sort of the connective tissue is a love of music.
Yeah.
So you've got your specialists, old heads, and then you've got, the young blood. And I think that music is such a great cut through for people to connect on, whatever age, whatever gender, ethnicity.
If you think about
you see that in particular crowds and particular artists of whom they will attract.
So for example, I mean, how old are your kids?
11 and 8, and both of them are like, we don't like music as much as you.
Okay, so there's that, but I'm thinking, the other thing is, it's another one of those really big topics, like, how do you appeal to people like, I don't know, 14, 15 onwards, that's kind of when people used to discover active. That's a kind of a number I pulled out of my head then. How do you attract people in that generation to radio these days? Like, I mean, even just teaching, I find just what do you call it? Like the battle for attention. There's just, there are just so many options beaming at people at such a rate.
I think that if you look at TikTok or YouTube, which my kids predominantly, that's the platform they watch things on, people still like stories, and people still like being spoken to. Yeah. And that's one of the great things about radio, is that there's someone talking to you. There's someone holding your hand and guiding you there, particularly the lockdown probably, there's periods of lockdowns we've had. There's a time where radio had huge growth. It's the cockroach that won't die in media, say, compared to, say, print or television, and no one ever predicted this. And the growth of podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Public radio and the kind of radio I make is essentially the original podcast. Those sort of 25-minute things where you do a deep dive on something, and they are super intensive but really rewarding things to make. I don't know if I answered your question.
That's right. I can't remember what my question was.
I can't listen to podcasts anymore because I can hear how they're made, and I get really finicky about the quality of editing, or the narrative devices that I can see through, but I probably don't use as judiciously or skillfully as other presenters and producers do.
Do any come to mind that are un-F-withable in terms of their quality in that regard? I listen to a lot as well, and I kind of teach a podcasting course now. So having said that, I know it's really putting you on the spot. Like if someone said to me, name your favourite tune at the moment, I'd probably struggle with that. So if you haven't got an answer, that's fine. But are there any impeccable podcasts?
Yeah,
that pass your test?
my nightly bedtime story that I have to go to sleep
I've
to
got a pen.
is the Reddit Today I Learned podcast.
Perfect.
Where it's about 7 minutes long, and it's a computer voice that reads out the 25 top Today I Learned posts. And I can do that because I can't hear any editing. I can't hear someone's voice getting annoying. I don't complain, I can't hear whether the music's like jarring or anything like that, or whether a presenter's or a producer is talking way too much, which seems to be a feature of the American narrative form. It's like, guys, someone needs to edit your script. You could say about 30% less.
Another one with editing that really irks me, and it's come, I think it's a
I don't care what you think. Just tell me what the story is.
Totally.
I don't care what you thought about it as you were trying to find this guest to interview. I really don't care.
A different problem, like I think if you're talking about editing in terms of the smoothness of the cuts, but just editing of the content, one that really irks me, and I've learnt to like kind of do my homework before I listen to stuff now. You know how true crime podcasts are kind of the big, I guess, kind of more mainstream audience podcast. It really irks me when I listen to 14 episodes of a true crime podcast about one case, and then around episode 12 it dawns on me, this could have been 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Why have you been dragging me down this garden path for all of these hours? It's sort of like it's almost like a con, that's how I feel. It's like trying to get you locked in for something that ultimately is quite underwhelming. And you've spent so much time listening to it.
Which is why I don't listen to them. It's in the same way I should probably break up with social media, because I feel so, just my opinion of myself just lowers when I've just scrolled for 3 hours. It's the same thing with podcasts like that. It's like, I could have made something in that time, or I could have gone and talked to someone I was supposed to talk to, checked in on someone rather than drifting off into podcast land. Or, I could have caught up on all those classic albums that I'm so ignorant of that I pretend like I've listened to and I haven't,
Yeah.
Time better spent, the battle for attention.
Another observation I made with podcasting is I remember my grandfather it just seemed so terribly boring when I was a kid, like having this constant audio feed of a voice all the time. I think it was probably national radio or whatever. And now I'm post 40. That is me. It's not music. It's not music. It's headphones in with constant podcasts. Talking. Information. It switches. Like, do you find that you still listen is it still part of your job to listen to that level? I'm projecting on you here because I just don't listen to as much music as I used to, and I'm fine with that, because I've listened to so much in the past. I guess I'm kind of talking about priorities changing and interests changing and so on.
Well, I guess this is why I love my job, because I'm forced to have to listen to new music.
Yeah.
And it's like you're always wanting that hit, hit you get when you first discovered music, and there's something that you just absolutely relish. It's like delicious. You just want more and more of it. Like that sense of finding a song or finding an artist or a new album, definitely it's still there.
And is that still like, in terms of it being, on the most pragmatic
getting
level,
excited,
part
just
of
getting,
your
just getting that feeling, that really, what do you call it? It's a word that always turned up in Bill Gosden's film festival catalog.
the feel,
palpable.
Oh, I was going to say
palpable.
The feels.
Yeah, he always used palpable. I used to play my own bingo game in the film festival. Rest in peace, Bill Gosden. Thank you.
So is that part of, because your key role at RNZ is still on Music 101, right? Not hosting, actually, but on the team.
Yeah, I'm on the team, and I make just music related content. So that's quite a nice big scope.
So, like a program director on a station, like say one of the BNet stations, you get sent a whole lot of music and press releases.
Not really. I go out and search for it. Okay. So again, thank you to all the labels and publicists, but also sometimes it's really fun to just find things off the grid. Like that's, I think, if you're a big music fan or something, there's still. I don't know if this is still relevant, but I still get some kind of kick out of finding something that hasn't been written about on Pitchfork or hasn't been sent to me by a label or a publicist. If I find something myself and just so, I don't know, that just has some kind of cachet or authenticity of, I've sniffed something out that...
And then do you pitch
that needs to be heard?
If that's going to be a story, do you go and how does it work? Do you pitch it to the rest of the team in terms of I'm thinking, say, filling a timetable or a program of Music 101, for example?
Oh God, I'm the least disorganised. Let it be known, I'm the least disorganised member.
Least organised or disorganised?
Disorganised. I'm the most disorganised.
Oh, you are the most disorganised.
The least.
That doesn't answer my question. How do you guys decide what is in a program?
Freestyler, yeah. How do I? Just throw it around the team. Just go. Has anyone heard this? And we think of where it might land best. So that could be: should it be played on a show? Should I play it in Pocket Edition? Oh, maybe we should just try and get an interview with that person. Yeah, any of those.
And then
it's quite organic. It's quite organic or quite instinctive.
Assuming the overall show is a composition unto itself, how do you guys decide on things like balance of stories or topics or artists or, is there consideration
that's always been driven by the presenter and the producer.
Right. So, which is currently Charlotte.
So what I was saying is, yes, I do stuff for Music 101, but I primarily work for RNZ Music, which is basically covers off any music-related content across RNZ National and digital and online platforms.
So that Jesse in the afternoons, for example.
Yeah, afternoons, or it could be for nights, or it might be that I'll talk about an artist in my slot on 9 to noon. I have a weekly hour-long program called the Pocket Edition, which is a bit of a digest of music content from across National, so that might replay interviews from Music 101 or Afternoons with Jesse Mulligan or Jim Mora or even Kim Hill and Catherine Ryan and so forth. So then I might slot in some music there, or I might do a little interview for that and there. So it's more about figuring out where something will land across the station, which is a really nice thing to do because people here really think quite carefully of where things will sit best.
So back on the timeline of one's life trajectory, you thought active was too cool for you when you were at uni. I'm assuming as a, vaguely 18 to 21-year-old undergrad.
I was busy being an activist then.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. What were the issues that you were mainly agitating for or against?
All of them.
Just anything that came along. There's a protest, I was there.
I wouldn't call Rent-A-Crowd.
We need more chips in the vending machines in the union building.
No.
So it's minimising your political leanings. So, what were you involved with?
I think it was, it started with, student-related things of free education, welfare, because, student loans were a huge issue back then.
Oh, totally.
But there was still
interest on them, eh? You still had to pay interest. Yeah.
What is it, like between 6 to 9% interest the minute you rung up and just said, oh, can I have $5,000 in my account tomorrow?
People were getting over 10 grand in their account as 18-year-olds. The bar, when I was there only a few years before you, the bar in the Union building used to put a sign out referencing loan day when loan day was on.
Do you know that
beer.
it takes 97 empty jugs of beer to get from the floor of the atrium to the roof of the atrium?
Why have you done that?
I have contributed to that, yes.
It's all right. It's 4% beer. It's not really beer.
That's right. I think it was probably just tui, and tui.
Okay, we veered from the very serious student occupation of activism to stacking student loan paid for beer jugs to the top of the Union building. So, there was fees.
Well, it started with student loans and fees and then moved into, I guess, what would now be seen as the beginnings of wealth inequality then.
Yeah.
So things like the Employment Contracts Act was pretty anti-globalization, all those sort of free trade plans, just wanting things to be a lot fairer. Climate change would come into that. A lot of it's really depressing. A lot of the things we were kind of rallying against the problems that are manifested now.
Did you ever kind of look back at what students were doing following? This is totally anecdotal from me, but it felt like, because I started teaching 10 years ago, and the thing I noticed... You
don't have the time. I don't think students have the time.
Well, I just think it's a really big topic, but students just seemed really notably not very politicized when I first kind of started teaching, and I feel like with Generation Z it's kind of coming back again. Generation Z feel like the next Gen X's to me in a way, but you're saying it's more a practical thing, a pragmatic thing. Like you've got your part-time job, you've got your full uni timetable. You don't have
the luxury that you used to of just floating around on campus, and I'd say a lot of my degree and my study actually took place by hanging out at the bar or hanging out with people in the library. You get a different quality to your learning that now it's so, again, it's that market model of teaching. You could afford to live on a student allowance back in those days, and have a part-time job and then still change to go out drinking and buying new clothes. I bought, even not on student loan, I swear I bought more clothes as a 20-something-year-old than I do now as an adult working.
I think, again, there's
I just felt like I had more disposable income and I was still saving. So I think everything's more structured and regimented. So more internal assessment, for example.
On that point, with the structured and regimented, another thing I noticed is again, anecdotal. I have no data, done no study, but just that era seemed like they're kind of. How do you put it?
It's the NCEA mindset. But also complete the assessment.
But but separate to that, on campus, there's nowhere to put posters, and no one does, and they're very obedient. There's no graffiti anywhere. There's no it's a generation that sort of there's cameras everywhere. The kind of, do you know what I'm getting at there? There's less room to do a whole lot of that on campus stuff because it's all a lot more controlled and understood as controlled from above. That sounds very Orwellian, doesn't it?
It does, but also let's not forget how much more fancy and high spec the facilities are for students now than they ever were in the time.
Oh, you got to see my building sometimes. It's crazy. I would have crawled over broken glass to have access to some of the equipment that those guys do.
I went through
and they go,
the new
first years they go, creative, whatever.
Yeah, like the messy the new creative media production space.
Yeah.
And I sort of say to the students, when you come and work in an IRL, it's not as fancy as here. They've got rehearsal rooms where you've just got every single cable is patched in. You just have to plug into the wall. They've got ADR suites. They've got they've got everything.
We've got two identical, amongst a whole of other stuff, because we have so many different majors in my degree, but we've got two identical radio studios that every radio industry person who I've seen go through them has always said without prompting, this is better than our studio setups, because it's not used as much and it's kind of relatively new. So yeah, but it's that whole thing of like that other thing, that access to technology now. Like I heard someone, actually it was Chuck D of all people, talking about how everyone's got this device in their hand now, and it's that whole like stopping thinking of it as a toy and starting to realize the power of it as a tool. And I really get that. That really made an impression on me with my students. Like, it's all so at their fingertips now, but you can so easily go really frivolous directions with it or really constructive directions with it. You know, like I feel like there's often a collective shrug at how much gear we do kind of have. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it Steve Lacy from the internet, who also produced some Kendrick Lamar tracks?
Oh, you mean the band? I thought you meant from the World Wide Web. I was like, that's quite.
Oh God, that band was so hard to find and do research on at the start when they first popped off.
You Google the internet.
He is. I think he is definitely an iOS producer. Like, he does everything either on his phone or just on his laptop.
Yeah.
He's super lo-fi.
Yeah. Amazing, eh?
But just gets the job done.
It could just as easily switch over to Insta for half an hour, lose that part of the day. So, we kind of got there with the activism, and now I'm interested in how you actually finally ended up on air somewhere. I don't know how many years later.
This one's good. I after I'd worked in the development education space, and so I did a lot of work in youth development when I first finished university. Myself and Specs, who is Sara Tamati of the very, very talented Tamati family, which includes Lady Six, the broader Ainga, which also includes Scribe, their cousin. She and I worked on a project to use hip-hop as a tool of education with young people in the youth worker space. So we wrote a book about hip-hop and how it's empowering.
Oh, wow.
Got it somewhere. Yeah. We wrote a book about hip-hop, and we used, because that was a time when hip-hop was huge with young people, but adults were still like, whoa.
Roughly early 2000s, I'm guessing?
Yeah. So, then that's when the hip-hop summits were still happening and things like that. So I did that, and then I thought, I'm going to go back and do some more study. So I offed to Canterbury University in Christchurch to do my MA in anthropology down there. And then while I was there, I thought,
hang on, why anthropology?
That's my major.
Yeah, why?
I love it because it's such a fascinating subject.
Great. Yep.
And my MA topic was looking at online social communities.
Yep.
And so this is like pre-Facebook, pre-MySpace. And yeah, it's and yet another unfinished thread in my life where I started this looking into online social communities and how people build movements and how they construct their sense of self through the online.
That sounds very similar to my PhD topic in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Oh, about the record stores.
Well, it was more about, online communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, less about me, more about you.
So I did that, but then I got, it took way, way longer than it should have because I ended up just walking into RDU and filling in a volunteer form. Sounds finally give it a go.
Even though there's higher stakes arguably in postgrad, that sounds very much how I describe my time at Vic, in that I scraped through a BA, but I didn't realise at the time I kind of did a broadcasting apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Because I was at the station all the time, even when I wasn't doing shows, just soaking it all up.
Yeah, and it's the only time I was really, because I'm not someone who's good at practice. I'm not someone who's good at detailed work, but I just like to be good at something as soon as I do it without any prior research. It's like, well, I should just be good at this. Like, what do you mean I have to practice or work at it? Anyway, it was the first thing I ever did, where I walked in, did some talking on the radio, played some songs, walked out of the voice booth, and the PD and everyone was just clapping. I was like,
Well, I don't know how often people say this to you, but I think there's things that some people just have a natural aptitude for, and you are a very good broadcaster, and I think that part of that, I shouldn't say this as someone who teaches elements of radio, I think part of that just can't be taught, so that's probably what you found then, which is awesome.
I mean, I cringe to listen back to that stuff.
It doesn't matter, someone spotted it in you straight away, which is what I'm saying, so that's great.
Yeah, so then I just did a degree in RDU, basically.
Nice.
And
did you finish the Masters?
Pardon me?
Did you finish the Masters?
Oh, many years later.
Details. Yeah.
Many years later.
I think you prioritise things right, hindsight being 2020, and I think I didn't need to tell you that, so there we go.
Yeah, well, I mean, my everlasting regret is that I never wrote a paper from my MA at that time, which would have been, this is a time when internet research was saying it's either utopian or dystopian, but I went off into some other thing. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I also tried to examine celebrity and do online social community, so probably a bit too broad for an MA.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, while I was there, RDU turned 30.
Yeah.
So they got me to do the research for that, the history of the 30th anniversary.
And the research
station.
was something they were going to do a documentary about it or something like that?
No, they just wanted someone to do the research.
Get
and
into
just
the
pull
archives,
something, Just this is pre-podcasts and all that kind of thing. It was more like, maybe we'll get various alumni to be guests on the show or invite them to things and that sort of stuff.
At the moment.
I'll write little profiles on them and so forth. And then as I was doing that, I thought, I think there's something more to this. Like, it could be something for all the student radio stations. You see where this is going, right?
I do. Yeah. What year was that?
RDU must have turned 30 in 2005 or 6.
Oh, wow. So it's still a few years before that seed was planted and...
Yeah, I was sitting on it for ages.
At RNZ, it's a great idea. Just as a quick aside,
I went and had children.
I'm doing this at the... Well, that's a fairly substantial reason to leave it for a while. I'm doing, at the moment, Audio Culture have asked me to do a 4,000-word history of the whole of Active from 1977 to now.
I can share so much material with you that I didn't use.
Oh, that would be great. That's not why I brought it up, but that would be great. What I'm finding is, just thinking about when you embarked on that process is it's not
bear in mind I've never made anything for RNZ before.
No, I was just going to say that no with the 30 years of RDU what I quickly realized is there's not actually really a lot substantive written or covered about Active over the years, because why would other media organisations cover it? There's kind of John Campbell started there, Samantha Hayes worked there, Roy's been there 40 plus years, all really important and interesting kind of facts and parts of history. So the tact I've taken is, and again, it's I've label wise, this is not the most efficient way of doing things, is I've just reached out to as many people from the station's history as I can, and I'm currently waiting for a whole lot of questionnaires to come back. So my idea is to get kind of everyone to tell, a whole lot of people to tell the story rather than me trying to tell it from sort of print archives of 40 years, because a lot of the history in those
are really useful.
Oh no, absolutely, totally. But what I'm getting at is those places are about all the individual stories.
It's all salient. That's
all
the
individual stories piecing together. I think, I hope.
Yeah,
because it's not a place.
This might be boring. This might be boring podcast, but we should definitely take this conversation. And I've still got all the names, and there's some really fascinating people that came through the doors of Radioactive. Not just the obvious names too.
And what have you got, recordings with them?
Yeah, or just their contacts. I had a whole spreadsheet. There were people who went off to did sort of development and aid work, or spearheaded a lot of the development programs for the United Nations.
Wow.
And
how did you track these people down?
Sub-Saharan, pardon me?
How did you track these people down? Just asking around?
Yeah. I just I can't remember how. That's just what I do. I track people down. Maybe I should start like a side hustle as a private investigator.
You can always fall back on that. It doesn't take much to get it.
I mean, if you've got an anthropology degree in your back pocket, then you're always snooping around wanting to know what people are up to.
So you find yourself back in Wellington. I think you did do a stint at Active for a bit, right? But you didn't really.
My claim
really
to fame
feeling
is
it?
I got to fill in for Sam Hayes.
Great.
And shoot, that was about the glittering heights of Radioactive for me.
But you've kind of felt like I heard you saying something that I've actually thought for a long time about Active. I think in my words, I think they kind of missed the boat with news and editorial. Like, it's sort of that side of their content at the time was a little bit lacking, right? Like talking to people
no
about
interest
stuff.
in it at all.
Yeah. There was in the past, I can tell you that, because I remember doing shows where such, and I remember it's something that just. For a number of reasons I probably won't really get into, from my perspective, it kind of just became very music focused, and I always felt like it kind of could have been a more active version, whatever Active is, an active version of RNZ in many ways, a kind of very localized Wellington version, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And it was interesting hearing you. I'm quoting yourself here, kind of saying as much about why you felt you would move on to somewhere else, which was weirdly back to Victoria, even though you weren't a student. How come they let a non-student who was a bit older be the breakfast host on Victoria Broadcasting, or whatever it was called?
I don't remember how that... I actually can't remember how that happened. I really don't.
Do people and don't take this the wrong way, because I'm talking about the realities of low power FM here. Were people listening to it?
No idea.
Right. But you must have got calls and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we get pretty interesting interviews, and some people liked it. I don't really remember that much of that time, because I was also working full time.
I don't know how you did that. I just used to find doing those hours.
So I did my breakfast show, and then I'd go to normal work.
Oh my God. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
With kids as well?
Oh no, I was pregnant at the time, and then
even that. My gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow. So I mean, yeah. So does Vic still have a radio station, or was that a thing that kind of?
I don't think it does anymore. It was Salient FM, and last I saw, the last I saw of it was that VUSA between the university and the Students' Association, they'd sort of quietly mothballed it, I think, and it's been very difficult to find out what actually happened. But
right.
I don't know. I feel like there's definitely a place for Active to return, to create that relationship. You don't have to be on campus so much as to
for sure.
cultivate those connections. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's another story. There's a lot to it. When all of that went down, just before my time when I got involved, but. I think the powers that be at that time, because it was actually a different. It's long ago enough that I can say it was a different world then. Basically, didn't understand or like the bunch of long hairs in the corner of the building.
It was also ideological at the time. There was this ideology. A lot of student associations and a lot of unions and groups like. Non-governmental organisations like YWCA, they owned a lot of property and assets, and it was at a time where, those aren't your core function. You should strip back to your core function. It's very ideological.
Yeah, totally. Cut into the neoliberal era of why is this here if it's not making money? And there were a lot of students that agitated, a kind of a lot of maybe future ACT people who were on campus at the time who agitated that way. But it was also, as I say, a kind of misunderstanding of who was involved. One of the PDs told me only recently, very seriously, that the caretaker thought that we were devil worshippers.
Was that old Collins from who?
Who, the caretaker?
It might have been.
No, it was Paddy Moran was the PD, but yeah, he said the caretaker, it turned out, was genuinely scared of him and us because there was a poster that had some reference to Satan at the time, which was just, shock 90s stuff, but he really thought that we were a collective of Antichrist people in the corner of the building.
They were different times. Different times.
Yeah. So you make it back to, you've already done that. You came back to Wellington, you stint on active, and then, you finally get to pitch the doco idea to RNZ.
Remember how I talked about football?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's
just so happened that one of my teammates worked here at RNZ.
That's all you need.
And he's like, we're looking for ideas. And I was like, I've got an idea. Yeah, that's how it happened.
So this is very low-key description. It's substantive. It's about 4 hours. That's a lot more at the other end than an idea.
Well, I have to
I've never made anything
for cracking the whip on me and teaching me everything I know, because it was I don't know how they just entrusted me with the task and just left me to it. And I think there must have been about 46 interviews that I conducted.
Wow, yeah.
Which actually, again, is an excellent way to learn how to make things and how to get better at interviewing. Again, I would never want to listen back to those interviews. But also, you're asking people to talk about a time that, I hate the term salad days, but it is.
It is. No, absolutely it is. It's formative. It's a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot of stuff coming in at a really, at a period of a lot of people's lives where, that's really full on and beneficial for them. Yep, totally.
Yeah, and it often is the stepping stone for whatever they went on to do. So it wasn't hard to get people to talk about it. What's really interesting about student radio is, for some people, that was the absolute pinnacle of whatever they achieved, and it seems like they're always trying to return to that. For other people, it's a stepping stone. It's just really nice to hear people's stories.
Yeah, and
just that thing of sometimes when you care about something so much, you can almost surprise yourself with what you can achieve.
Who's this? You?
No, the people, people who were involved at BFM at the time, or RDU at the time, or Radio 1, or Radioactive, or, the sort of tragic story of what happened to Hamilton, Waikato, what happened to their station. But it was always people just going above and beyond themselves to create something.
How long did it take you from pitch to getting the first episode on air? Must have been at least a year.
I started I probably should have done a bit more research to
just ballpark, a year, 6 months, 2 years.
It must have been less than a year.
That's
it was just like I spent all of summer locked in an editing room.
Had you ever made a documentary before that?
No.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
Again,
well done.
All credit to Kirsten Johnstone, who patiently taught me how to do it. And she's such a passionate person about audio-driven stories, and she's such a I wouldn't say perfectionist, but she's a real taskmaster and a craftsperson.
Look,
she's such a great person to learn from.
There's things that I've, because one of the perks of being a teacher is you're actually constantly learning yourself, because often, not everything you go to teach, inside out. So, even what I know about the fundamentals, the universal fundamentals of storytelling and structure that I didn't know when I was, for example, doing the Brecky show, would take me leaps and bounds further into being able to pull off something like that. So, I'd imagine that you had a schooling in all of that. Like, what's the inciting, what kicks this episode off? What moves it forward? If you haven't done any of that before, it's like there's basic rules, right? I'm assuming that you kind of didn't know a lot of that going in.
it's so funny because now it's just second nature.
Yeah, totally.
I think.
And I don't know why. I've got to apologise there. I don't know why I said to you that I thought you wouldn't. It's actually because of what I've heard you say about it. Like, I just figured that I realised you were kind of greener to it than I thought you were based on what came out. So it's a compliment. Yeah. It's a compliment to the
thanks.
statement. Yeah.
I think it's you know how I said that the most fascinating part of that series was the fact that people, you know, you almost go beyond yourself or outside of your skin to create and do things that you would have never imagined. You know, that these people who are sort of 18 and 19 years old were putting up transmitter masts or making applications to the broadcasting powers that be, or trying to set up a TV station, or all the things that they tried to do. In some ways, I suppose that was what making the doco was like as well.
Yeah,
in a really, really condensed micro form of that. And it was that thing of
very meta.
Yeah, and it was that thing of I felt the weight of, you know, this is something that's going to be on national radio, on RNZ.
Oh, absolutely.
But also it was a story I felt really passionate about and felt obliged to do properly. So it didn't matter, you know, like, let us not look at the hourly rate, is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think more often than not in my life, the things
I think it cost me more than
the things I make the best hourly rate from are probably the things I'm least emotionally invested in, and then the things that I spend the most time on. But isn't it great to have that luxury to be able to exist in both?
And then so the whole. Eventually, it was like I'd come in, I treated it like a job. So I'd come in every day at RNZ and do my interviews, and I'd start editing. And then eventually they were like, ugh, suppose we better give you a swipe card.
Yeah.
I was like, because, you know, someone have to come and keep getting me. I was like, okay, step one, I've got a swipe card.
And you've never left.
That's it. I still got that same swipe card. Yeah, that was part of my dastardly plan.
Well, there's a whole lot.
Be around enough.
There's like, and also like, I think the timing was really good. Like when you suggested that topic as a doco, and then of course I think the
Paul Casserly made a television documentary about it as well.
And I wasn't going to ask this; it just sprung to mind. It's like I sort of dwell on the.
Can I just say he gave me such amazing stories.
Great.
Ones that could not go on air. But he had some brilliant stories.
I wasn't going to ask this, dwell on the negative with things, but I just know from even just articles I've written that involve a lot of people, and you can't include all those people because, again, it's how storytelling works, you know. Did anyone whinge? Did you get any whinges after it came out?
Oh, it was such a long time ago.
Okay.
So I don't remember. Oh, there would have been a couple of train spotters where I would have got something factually incorrect somewhere.
Well, I could reel off a whole lot of things I like about it, but here's one very particular thing. I liked how you let each piece of music breathe in between each bit of narrative. I thought that's very apt for student radio. Often
that's
music takes a backseat. Great.
I cannot take any credit for that. I do that now in my pieces, thanks to learning that little piece of craft from her. But I cannot take any credit for that.
Okay, lastly, there seems to be a lot of deflecting in me trying to give you praise for making this taco. The last thing I'll say is, you said, and I quote you, that if you did it again, you'd do some stuff differently. I mean, that's just the creator's kind of dilemma, isn't it? Reflecting on stuff. What did you mean there? What would you have done differently?
Oh, what would I have done differently? I think there are a few people I didn't push hard enough to track down.
Yeah.
I think I would have approached the interviews quite differently, and I would have used a different research approach than I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. I might be allowed to tell you now that I'm actually about to pull up the old folders out of the archives, and I might be giving them a little spruce up.
Are you doing like a director's cut?
Here's the thing. Episode 4 was the first time I was left alone to make an entire episode.
Oh, wow.
And
so you did all the editing, all the post, everything?
I did everything myself. That was my first time I was left alone to do it, and it needs a tidy up.
So you're going to do a director's cut of episode 4?
Yes, I am. I've got notes that I wrote years ago of like, oh, that needs changing, and I haven't quite had the stomach to return to it, even though I have the notes.
It's an oddly specific.
A director's cut redux of that.
It's an oddly specific, but at the same time, nerdily exciting piece of news. Thank you. I wish I had an air horn to let off here, like the BBC One Extra exclusive sound.
Warning, warning, warning. This is a your DJ name here. Exclusive.
So they will be saying they may be seeing the light of day again.
So again, things you just probably barely remember now from years ago, so I'll just quickly brush over them. Taxi DJs was fun, and the reason I'm mentioning that story you did is because I have learnt a lot, particularly when I lived in Melbourne and I spent a lot more time in cabs late at night, from cab drivers, and that's how I found out about Bally Sagoo, who's like an Indian kind of super DJ. So there you go. And taxi drivers always like reasonably surprised when a white fellow
that was a really
queries them on their music.
Story.
Oh, you do remember it. Great.
The thing is that there's a video we did a video piece of that, but this is one of the things where I should probably get better at editing video, and then I could just make them myself, but that kind of fell by the wayside in the hands of someone who was in charge of that. That would have been great. They were great talent, those taxi drivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always fun going out and doing stories in the field.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I've actually thought about, Lucy from Peanuts, her psychiatrist stand?
Yes.
So picture that, but like a podcast version, like maybe a Vox pod, I could call it. Like having 3 or 4 predetermined questions that I ask anyone who sits down with me in a public space, and then just editing down that as a podcast episode. Kind of a snapshot of Greater Auckland.
I'd like that set up.
Yeah.
Because it's very reminiscent of what I'd imagine a lemonade stand to look like. But I would dispense songs to people. So I'd do musical prescriptions.
How do you give it to them?
They come and tell me what
how do you give them? Would you send them a Spotify link or something?
Yeah, I would make them a little playlist.
And how does it work while you're sitting there? My idea works better practically. Do you record their responses?
No, I wouldn't make anything out of it. I'd just be dispensing music.
Oh, that's
music
beautiful.
Dispenser MD.
Yeah, like
the music doctor.
Like a sort of a little kind of one-person festival in the middle of urban spaces, maybe.
They're really bespoke. Be like, tell me, what do you need the music for? Okay, let me pull some songs for you. Here's 5 songs for you.
Now we're winding down now, but come to the more serious part of the conversation. I've decided I've been asking people more this lately, in sort of general terms. How are you coping with the current state of the world? I mean, that's so huge.
I think
as a mother, as an activist, as a storyteller,
I've now
as an empath,
I'm a dormant activist because I'm waiting for my return.
There's not such a thing.
I'm waiting to strike again. Ha ha ha. Excuse the pun. How am I feeling about it? I think, and amongst all, I find in these times actually history is a really useful thing to look back on, because throughout history we've always had pandemics, we've had war, there are people who have gone without. So maybe the last 80 years was an aberration in history, that we haven't had a contagion that was threatening us, that we've been so hypermobile more than we ever have been before.
We've been lucky in a lot of ways in that regard, yeah.
That's what I mean. It's 80 years of an aberration. Like, never in the time of human history have we been so hypermobile.
Yeah.
That you wouldn't think of anything to just jumping over to another country for a weekend, or, making multiple trips around the world. And then, and amongst all that, we still have real life. People still need to put food on the table. People still need to have a roof over their heads. People are born, people die. And so and amongst all these big things of a pandemic or, economic uncertainty or civil unrest, people still need to have babies, get married, go to hospital, grieve people they've lost. So, and that's pretty much, there's been a bit of that for me this year. So, I guess it's just a time to focus on the small things and just be really grateful that I am in a position to do that.
That's right.
So that's one. Number two is my family from Burma. So that's been a really hard thing to watch unfold. I have a cousin over there, and I believe he's had to go into hiding because they've been raiding street by street. And my auntie's gone into hiding. My cousins also have all their families there. My auntie just lost her mum over there, who's elderly.
Yeah.
But the assumption was her children may make it back to their home country, but with a pandemic and civil unrest, that was just not possible. And then, there's just things like, how do you even transport a deceased person across town when you've got roadblocks and civil unrest? That's what I mean, of like people, not only these big things happening, but people that still have to navigate the everyday tragedies.
Yeah.
And, I'm sure this is the case for every immigrant kid, where that notion of where home is drummed into you. It is that country. And just seeing again that, they have a government that just basically enacts terrorism on its own people for everyone to watch, and just being so powerless to be able to do anything. There was initially so much hope that people were taking to the streets and uprising, and now it's just cold, hard fear because
descended
they're
into
killing
kind of a
their own
chaos,
people.
right? Yeah. Have you been back to Myanmar?
I have. I went to Burma when I was about 21, and so everything was still closed up then. People wouldn't talk to you. You'd be followed. You'd have to log every place you go to. You couldn't stay with relatives because they'd have to sign in with the local authorities. And then the next time we went was after power, and quote unquote, and in inverted commas, was shared with the NLD, which is the National League for Democracy, which is Aung San Suu Kyi's party.
Is that 2010 around then when that? So
we went in 2012.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. You saw a lightness in people.
Wow.
People,
like,
even though they were economically no better off, just the sense of some form of political freedom was really a really interesting change to see.
It made me realise so short-lived. You see that, and then only a few years later, where we are.
Yeah, but the thing was that it was never the NLD in power.
Yeah.
Maybe the West thought that was the case, but it was always the Tamador, which is the military government. And then...
so it was a ruse.
Yeah, it was always... it was just window dressing. Always window dressing. And it's always been... the thing with Burma is that even since the day of pre-colonial kings, those empires have always been troublesome, and there's always been an inequitable distribution of the wealth and resources. So, in a very Burmese Buddhist way, it's just your karma, right?
This is so interesting. So I won't keep you too much longer. Another thing I've got to ask now is you say Burma. I say Myanmar.
Mm-hmm.
What's Myanmar? What's the story there? Like,
I'll never call it. I'll never call it Myanmar. That's the name from the government. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because you either call it the name of the colonizers or you call it the name of the military dictatorship. It's not really much of a choice.
I had that question in my head yesterday when I did some reading, and I wondered about that. What to refer to the country as, It's interesting, It
was Aung San Suu Kyi's father that tried to unite the federation of tribes that were loosely the country of Burma, or Bamabi.
Yeah.
And Bama is one tribe. It's the dominant ethnic group.
And so we're going to go on too long. I've got too many questions. Last couple, is that why you're I haven't even asked, is it both your parents who are from there, or one?
Yep.
Is that why they initially came to New Zealand? Because of the
this
unrest?
is a whole other story.
We could leave it. Okay, you probably
There's a
got
whole
to get back to
other
work.
story, and it goes to Sir Bernard Ferguson, who was the former Governor General in New Zealand. My granduncle, who was a district governor at the time and was part of the displaced government of the time of the 62 coup.
Yeah.
And then he did some pretty interesting stuff when he came to New Zealand, being a teacher at Rongotai College, being the community liaison, community worker for Black Power, who started the workplace trusts, and was, up there with Eva Rickard and other esteemed leaders in Māoridom. Good old Burma Bill. He's a whole nother story.
And two quick last things to close, one on that topic and then another one to coast us in for a landing. Is there a Burmese population of size in Wellington, and have you stayed connected to that community over the years?
I'm more connected to the Auckland community. There's a huge diaspora now there in Nelson, here in Wellington, Palmerston North, and definitely in Auckland, a lot more than I ever grew up with. And so when everyone says, your Burmese is so, it's a bit all over the place, I can still speak it. I'm still fluent and I still understand it.
Wow.
But it's I had no one to talk to, there's a critical mass now. I'm always fascinated for the kids who are growing up like me, the ones who are doing this in the 90s and the 2000s.
Thank you so much. I actually just realised I'm going to go and teach a class in 10 minutes. So lastly, I was going to say, Final Mix is great. It's really fun and everyone should watch it.
And I think that might be the first and last of it.
Why?
I don't know if they're going to do it again.
Okay.
I don't know if they will.
I just watched the Church and AP one before we started chatting and had a good giggle. They're lovely boys.
Oh my gosh, I love them. They are so onto it. Church is just such a musical nerd. It's great.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome. Happy editing.
You've laid the invitation out now, so I will be in touch about maybe getting some active resources off you for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Article.
Yeah,
okay.
Cool. Off you go.
Bye-bye. See ya.
See ya.
Another Hot Mix exclusive. Another Hot Mix exclusive. Another Hot Mix exclusive. The baddest tunes from the dopest DJ. The baddest tunes from the dopest DJ. The baddest tunes from the dopest DJ. Kill him with the music. Party harder. Kill him with the music. Party harder. Kill him with the music. Party harder. The DJ just came. The DJ just came. The DJ just came.